On today's episode, we'll talk about why human flourishing is literally terrorism, read some words of wisdom from a Reddit theologian, examine the irony of needing the proper papers to visit a human rights museum, and finally, learn that being lazy isn't actually a thing. This is Cringe Post. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Cringe Post podcast. My name's Britt.
And I'm Donald.
And we're here, we take on those different types of posts you might see in your feed, but you don't just quite know how to respond to them. We kind of take those, summarize the best ones we've seen this week, and we pick them apart and kind of give some good logical reasoning for why they're wrong. So we're going to get into that in a moment. But before we do that, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, whether you're on YouTube or if you're on the Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really, really helps us out and helps us keep this show going. So before we get into showing other people's cringes, we really like to make fun of ourselves, and today, because it's not my turn, I get to make fun of Donnie. So we go to November 23rd, 2009. Donald Kimball writes, "Is really, really nervous. Gotta recollect my spirits." And then as anyone, normal person would, someone that cares about you in your life comments, "Why?" And then you respond, "You'll find out if you're lucky." And then whoever was responding said, "Oh, goody." Is that like your parents or I don't know?
No,
maybe it was a girl that was.
No,
it
was a friend. No, it was a friend of mine, a male friend of mine who was just asking like, "Why? Like, why are you nervous, bro?" And I'm like, if you're lucky, I mean, obviously, there's sort of the young cringe of posting something like, "I'm really nervous. I'm not going to tell you what that is." But just the gall to say, "You'll find out if you're lucky." I mean, obviously, I was kind of teasing and being joking with, the XD or whatever, but it's still just like, oh, it's so cringe.
Well, it's like you were subtweeting before there was, subtweeting, right?
Yeah.
Like that's, I mean, a lot of the cringes you and I've looked at of each other is like, one, it's telling of the time, because it's like back when it's Donald Kimball is really, really nervous. But it's like you would do these like vague posts because it's like, I really hope someone comments and asks, obviously you weren't going to tell anyone if they asked.
Yeah, I know, what's the point? it's like I'm feeling this particular way, and I'm going to lure you in with the mystery, and then I'm just going to keep you there and I get the satisfaction of knowing that you're wondering why. and the funny thing to me too is, even though there was one person who was on the bait, I mean, that's pretty bad. That's pretty bad ratio. One person reacting, no likes, no other comments, just one taker.
I mean, now that's been like 12 years since this. You care to share what you were really nervous about? Did you recollect your spirits?
I wish I could tell you. I'm trying to think. By the year 2009, I don't know. I don't think I was in high school that year. I think 2010 was my entry year. Or no, you know what? No, 2009, actually, that would have been my first year. So you know what this probably was? This was probably about asking a girl to our banquet. That's probably what it was. That would be my guess. Because I had to call her dad. That was the scary part. My parents made me call her dad to ask permission. I wasn't even like into this girl or anything. She was just a good friend. But her dad was like one of those very domineering fathers, very towering sort of dark figures that you're scared of, sort of cowering under. So that's probably what it was. But I don't know why I would say you'll find out if you're lucky. It's more like you'll find out if everything goes well for me and I don't feel like I'm embarrassed.
Yeah. Just so did she go with you, or did you go with her?
Yeah,
I guess
she did. Yeah, we went together. It was fun. It was a good time.
That's awesome. Great news. All right, well, moving on from that, we go to our first cringe of the day. And so this one, we've got a picture on Twitter, and it's of, is that, how many kids is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 kids. It's 9 kids, and they're kind of stacked from like smaller to taller. So age range from 2 months to 11 months. So they're all, it's like a family photo of all these kids, which is
11
awesome.
Years. not to 11 months, to 11 years.
Oh yeah, sorry, 2 months to 11 years. We can use that as a future cringe. And so anyways, someone on Twitter reposted this and said, "Y'all, this is insane. This is literally terrorism."
Well, it's someone else replying that this is literally terrorism. And
Oh,
my hope,
the cringiness seemed the same. So
yeah, I was gonna say the first name is cut off on the screen cap, but I mean, if I saw this, like, I could understand the reaction. This is insane, because nine kids is a lot. Like, being like, that's insane, sort of, as an expression I'd get. But then the reply of, this is literally terrorism, and you're like, oh, well, okay, you actually have the bad take.
yeah, it's like, I mean, it kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of these like globalists and elitists that like they like view themselves as like better than other people. So it's like we're so scared about the earth being overpopulated, right? I'm assuming that's where they're coming from. Maybe they've got me from a different, the kids in this photo are white, so the picture of the person replying is a different color person. So it's like maybe they're like hating on the fact that like this white family's having a bunch of kids, because for some reason like white supremacy is synonymous with terrorism nowadays, and white supremacy is anything that is not total lefty stuff. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I wonder what they mean by terrorism, but it's just crazy to like assign that like human flourishing is a bad thing, right? Like I see 9 healthy kids. Like, what an amazing thing to see that. Like, that's incredible.
Well, I feel like I want to be a leftist here and get the clap emoji, normalize having lots of children, because that's really a good thing for society. Totally. I mean, I can't remember the economist now, but there was some economist writer who totally took on this idea of overpopulation and how more humans bad. And he took it down with the idea that like when you create more people, you create more possibility for invention and genius and human flourishing, not only by humans living out and experiencing joy and liberty and all those things, but by that reality, you create people who can solve problems in new ways and think of new ideas. And I think, as we've seen in most parts of the world, like when you have more people, and you allow that level of liberty and creativity to come into full expression, then you do end up solving for these problems. Now, if you have mass population and you are strictly controlling what they can and can't do, and you tamp down the human spirit, then yeah, overpopulation could be a bad thing, in the same way that it's like if you had 12 people packed into a small box and you didn't let them out of that box, then yes, 12 people is worse than 5, right? But under normal, sort of basic human right conditions and letting people be free and full of liberty, then absolutely more humans is a great thing. And that's maybe part of the reason why these people don't want to celebrate that, is because they don't like the idea of there being lots of people who are free to live how they want to live and do what they want to do, because these elites, they know how to best live, and the more people there are, the more they have to control and the more they have to clamp down and keep within the parameters of acceptable behavior.
Yeah, and it's I think actually Tom Woods and Michael Malice had a good like little, I can't remember what they like do their cartoon, and they talk about different capitalist and free market issues. But they made a solid point that, back in the 70s and 80s, people were like, holy cow, like we're going to have all this overpopulation and people are literally going to die and starve because of it. And yet we've seen the exact opposite, right? We've literally, our population has boomed. Like we have, I think from the 1900s to now, we have literally doubled the population of the world, yet there are less and less and less people that go hungry every single day. In fact, there's more than enough food for everyone to be fed. The only reason people don't get fed is usually because of some corrupt government, right, that is withholding the food from their people. And so that's what's really cool. So it's like, okay, well, if we're just going to like take it off of like a univariate analysis, right? It's like, well, in population increases and hunger goes down. So it's kind of hard to make the argument that everyone's going to starve to death. And so they've kind of pivoted, right? They've pivoted to like the climate change and the world is going to end because it's getting hot and because we all use all this much more energy and everything. It'll be interesting to see kind of how that correlates over the next 100 years.
Yeah, well, and I mean, to that point, even that same, I think it's the politically incorrect guide to, and then insert topic, is the Tom Woods and Michael Malice. They make the great point about oil, where, if someone invents an engine that is, 10 times more efficient on the use of oil, even if you haven't increased the oil supply, you've now made oil go 10 times further because of this innovation. And so I think we'll probably see similar things with climate change. I'm not an expert in the field, and I don't pretend to be. I'm not going to say that I know all these statistics and studies of why climate change is a hoax or why it's completely inevitable. But what I do know is that when you allow market solutions, at the very least, this kind of problem gets ameliorated by providing solutions and options for people to adjust to the changing climate. And whether that means having to move landmass or whatever, well, having grounds flood, like I think there's a lot of predictions about certain states being underwater because of the sea levels rising. And it's like, we'll have to adapt, but the best way to adapt isn't through government control and order. It's going to be through free markets being able to provide tenable solutions, and then charitable voluntary actors helping in and to rescue and save people. Hurricane Katrina comes to mind, where the government literally locked down and turned away people trying to come in with food to that area, with people who coming in with volunteers to they locked down and turned people away for weeks before they had government people coming in. And it was horrible. People died. There was so much because the government wanted control over that. So that comes to mind with the climate change. But before we move on from this, I also want to say that even on a micro level, there is something sinister about the sort of the demonization of large families, because and not to go conspiracy theory, because I don't necessarily think that this is like the global elites all plotting for this to happen, but I do think a byproduct is the culture then when you move away from the idea of large families or close-knit big families, or close-knit families at all, it becomes very easy to rely on the government to take care of you in your old age or in your sickness or whatever that is. When you have local communities that are, I think the way that I've always thought of it is like the higher the level of control, the less it should be involved. So like federal government, if you have to have one, should be completely, basically have nothing to do with your life. You should not have to interact with the federal government on a day-to-day business, like, ever. The state government should be completely out of your hair as well, and like maybe slightly more involved, but really not at all. And then the further levels down you go, to the point where your family is the most involved, structure or unit or government, if you will, that you should be involved with. And so having a large family provides that level of care, of siblings looking after each other, and then when the parents grow old, all those siblings can pitch in to help take care of them, and that provides healthy communities of families, and it also helps build an actual geographic community as well. So I think a lot of left types that have demonized this have created this culture of skepticism around that idea, as we move more to a reliance upon government, which culturally is really not a great way to go because of a lot of factors, not the least of which is it bankrupts society.
Absolutely. That was great, man. All right, moving on to our next one. So we've got a post by the comic Dave Smith, and he says, "God is good." And for some background, for those of you that don't know Dave Smith, he had his first son was born in the past few weeks, and had a pretty important surgery, and that all went really great. So obviously he's a lot to be very thankful for. His son was born, and a life-saving procedure was done successfully. And then this person comments or retweets or what comments on it and says, "Have you read about him? He's not good in any way, shape, or form. Congrats on the baby, but seriously, God's not even the protagonist in his own book."
Man, I feel like I have a lot to say on this one, even though it's such a stupid cringe. I want to go off on this dude. First of all, really, all of the ellipses in this post, in any shape or form, but seriously, What are you, a boomer? Stop it with the ellipses, man. Get rid of those. This is dorky. Second of all, my favorite, I told you this earlier, but my favorite reply to this reply was like, "You're the kind of guy who brings up divorce statistics at a wedding." It's like, what a cringy thing to say, even if like the sentiment was true, which it's not, but let's say it's true. Like, that's such a stupid thing to say. Like, "Oh man, I'm really excited. I just got a new Xbox. Actually, PlayStation's better." No one wants to hear from that guy. Just before you open your mouth, just think about it for a second. Who are you helping here? No one.
Yeah, it's this like arrogant atheist types that's really frustrating. They're like, "Ooh, God is evil." I mean, I'm assuming, because Dave Smith, I believe he's married to a Catholic, right? And so I'm assuming there's probably some more Christian ethos in there, Judeo-Christian ethos in there. And so I'm assuming this guy's kind of like attacking that. It's like, dude, you've not even read like the Bible. Like literally, I don't think you could. I think the least debatable point about the Bible is that God is the protagonist of the book. And that's what most atheists have a problem with, right? So it's like, this guy doesn't even get it right on that level. It's embarrassing, like just on the actual like content of the argument he's trying to make. Even if God wasn't good in the Bible, even if he wasn't, he's definitely the protagonist. Like,
yeah. Yeah. Well, it's this classic thing where people who aren't theistic will assume the position or assume the things of the other side when it benefits them and not when it doesn't. So it's like, that's what makes me laugh, is like, he's not the protagonist in his own book. Well, okay, you have to make in order to make that claim, if you're using it in sort of a moral good standpoint, you have to make the claim that there is morality and there is good, and that in his own book where he defines morality, at the very least you would say he's hypocritical to his own law or something. But that's kind of the jest or the gist I get from that tweet, is like, he breaks the own morality he sets up. But the problem is it's this taking out of context things and then using it against Christians when it suits you and then running away when it doesn't. And it's like, well, no, if you look at all the biblical scholars and you understand the original language, you understand the context. You don't take verses and cherry pick them here. You understand why I think certain things are done and how they're done and how it is in accordance. And it's like, this arrogant person just assumes that everyone who's a Christian is just dumb and just doesn't read the Bible and doesn't read those cherry-picked verses and is just going along, rather than like actually having studied it and understanding the coherent flow of the narrative of the Bible.
What I think this person had was, and I encountered this with another person, where it's like they're like browsing like Reddit or Imager, and it's like, ooh, they see some like meme, and this podcast is kind of born out of combating that, but they see some meme with some impact font that says God killed 70,000 people in Exodus, check it out, Exodus 2 whatever, and it like, he's not even the protagonist of his own book because he doesn't obey his own morals, it doesn't make any sense. And he's like, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense. No one would have any ulterior motive to posting that, so it must be true. And then he's like, and he sees, oh, Dave Smith is saying this, so I'm gonna regurgitate this meme but make it seem like I'm the one that thought of it. It's like, you've never read anything. I was specifically thinking about like someone tried to make the argument to me that the Bible like doesn't think that the unborn child is like considered a baby, because this is what they use. They referenced a meme that said that God says life begins at first breath. It's like, dude, like, you've not read any of the Bible. Like, I could like, you think about all of the Psalms and all of the different stuff in Zechariah, where they're literally talking about an unborn child like it's an actual person, right? And about how the unborn child that was miscarried literally goes to heaven, and all this stuff. It's like, man, like, it'd just be better to don't be like a, because there's like, what is it? There's like layman theology, and then there's like Reddit theology. It's like, don't be a Reddit theologian. Like, just actually read it, or don't say anything. Don't try and regurgitate it and make the idea of your own, because it's not your own idea, and then two, it's definitely probably not accurate.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, it's like, oh, the Bible says that life begins at first breath, but the Bible also says that, like, Elizabeth's baby leapt in her womb at Mary's words. So it's like,
yes.
It referenced a living thing moving in there, so crossroads, I guess the Bible just contradicts itself. But the other funny thing about this tweet is that he's responding to Dave Smith, and anyone who knows Dave Smith knows that he came as a hardcore lefty in the comedy scene in New York. So even now, I mean, you listen to his podcast, you've got profanities flown, right and left. He came from again, total left-wing perspective, and then was enchanted by the Ron Paul revolution, where this guy was talking about non-intervention boldly, but then also explaining why all these problems are having. So then he came into libertarianism from that sect. He didn't come from a conservative Christian religious background. So it's like, This guy almost like how do you what's the term? It's not mansplaining. It's like atheist-splaining to Dave Smith like what atheists believe. It's like, what do you think Dave Smith was for the majority of his life before he married this Catholic woman that's now his wife that obviously is having some influence on him, what I would say for the better. But like it's just so funny to me. It's like telling the guy who survived a lion attack that like, actually, lions are kind of dangerous. It's like, you think he'd know more than anyone, certainly more than you.
Yep. I don't have any more on this one unless you do.
Well, we'll let him rest for now.
All right. Sounds good. So this next one that we've got is a post by the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. So it's going to be a good one. And it writes, "We're excited to welcome fully immunized visitors back to the museum beginning July 27th. Children under 12 may enter the fully immunized members of their household, with fully immunized members of their household." And it's a picture of them saying we're reopening July 27th.
At first, I remember seeing this and I was kind of like, oh, okay. I mean, this is just kind of basic, like, oh, they're, only welcoming immunized people. It's kind of okay. And then I was like, this is just kind of, oh, it's the Museum of Human Rights. Oh, that kind of, I didn't pick that up the first time. And then the great irony struck me.
Yes. Only certain type of people that we deem worthy are allowed to come to our museum, where we're going to tell you about the history of cultures and societies that have demonized people that they didn't find worthy. It's just
let's talk about how like a certain subgroup of people have been abused and prevented from accessing basic human rights. But we're only going to tell this to you if you inject yourself with the government issued needle. Let's skip over this part about needles and African American communities and the government real quick. Let's move past that exhibit while you get your COVID shot here.
Yeah. When they were doing it, they're like, man, we can't have this Tuskegee, exhibit like right at the front. We move it to the back, right?
Yeah.
We'll move it to the back, and after they watch the documentary about Fauci by Disney, like we'll let them do that one. But yeah. Man, did you see? Kind of pivoting just slightly, but like it's always my delight. Like I was looking at Dave Chappelle's new special, his like the Rotten Tomatoes score. It's like 2% of critics think this is great. It's like basically saying it's awful. And then it's like 90% of the audience likes Dave Chappelle's special. And then you go to the Fauci documentary and 90% of critics approve and 2% of, the general audience, like over 5,000 reviews say that it's terrible,
I was seeing those. And the other one that I saw thrown in the mix that was great was also like an 88% positive rating for Cuties from critics and a 2%, rating from Cuties. If you remember that horrible children sexualizing movie that was against sexualizing children, so they had to sexualize children. So just all these hilarious, but yeah, the Fauci one is the latest atrocity in that. And that's
what's so funny about all this stuff. It's like. It's very Orwellian when you really think about how like they take words and they'll sign it, like they'll package like all these policies or things that they do into a word group, the CARES Act or whatever, or the Museum for Human Rights, where we only allow certain types of people of certain standing in. And it's just like, wow, like Orwell really did get that right, before kind of a lot of these things happen, or I guess as they were happening, like, man, like they had the control that they have over people is by changing language and being able to make it suit their needs and how they want to make everyone behave and believe. And I think it's one of the valuable things about like Twitter and other places, as toxic as it can be, is like pointing out just how absurd it is that a place called the Museum of Human Rights that displays all these different human rights violations and atrocities over the years is posting about. The second-class citizens are not allowed into our museum.
Yeah, I'm curious. I was trying to see on their website, but I haven't. It doesn't say right at the start. It might be somewhere on there. Whether or not when they say fully immunized, if they mean specifically if you've had the vaccine, or if it actually means fully immunized, and they would also accept people with natural immunity. Something tells me that it's probably the former, not the latter, because it's very hard to prove that you had COVID at one point unless you get like a T cell measure or something like that, or some other indicator of resistance that the vaccine emulates that you would have naturally from your natural immunity. It's a little bit harder to get those tests. So I wonder if they're actually mean fully immunized, or if they're putting it in nicer terms, but they actually mean unless you've had the pharmaceutically profit-driven injection.
Yeah. I just can't imagine it. Obviously, this is like now 2 or 3 months ago. But like, you show up to the Museum for Human Rights and they ask for your papers. You got to show your papers.
Yeah.
And once you show your papers, they give you a nice little sticker that you put on yourself that identifies you as okay. And then you walk through and you read the Holocaust, section of like, oh, like, man, they would stop people and ask for their papers. And if they didn't have the right paperwork, they get assigned a sticker or, a little badge and be sent somewhere, or they weren't allowed to, live in these certain areas and stuff. It's like, I wonder how many people like saw the irony of all that. I don't know. Hopefully
Careful,
a few.
Brett. I'm gonna have to report you to Stop Anti-Semitism, and you're gonna be labeled a Jew hater for making that comparison.
Yeah, they're gonna put a nice red Jew hater, on my picture.
Oh boy.
All right, moving on to our last one. This person writes, "The more I think about it, the more I realize that being lazy is not a real thing. People are chronically ill, disabled, mentally ill, overworked, exhausted, but lazy isn't even really a thing. It's just another attempt to shame people into capitalist productivity." Oh, Bolliger.
I'm like, I mean, it's so funny because it's like people are chronically ill. Yeah. People are disabled. Yep. People are mentally ill. Yep. They're overworked. Sure. Exhausted. Absolutely. But lazy isn't really a thing. What? Why not? None of what you just listed is mutually exclusive with there also being lazy people. Like, I mean, you can say that people have scapegoated and used, lazy as a false accusation against people in those, positions. And that might be true, but that doesn't mean being lazy isn't a thing. And then, of course, then you have to go with the real root of the cringe, where it feels a little bit like you take off the Scooby-Doo mask, and it's another attempt to shame people into capitalist productivity. Oh, it's a Marxist all along. What do you know?
I wonder,
trying to deny that.
Like, I wonder if you approach this person and you pointed to genuinely lazy behavior, like hey, like like in their fantasy, we pay someone to sweep the floor $100 an hour, right? It's like, hey, at this fast food restaurant, it's $100 an hour. You sweep the floor, and the person that is, by our definition, lazy is like, I don't want to do a very good job, and they take a week to sweep the floor. Like, how would this person classify that? Like, how would they describe that behavior? I'm assuming they would probably say like mentally ill. Like, that's how they would have these other buckets that are not people's faults. Like, well, the only reason they don't work hard is because of this past trauma or this past learned behavior. But eventually you end up at like people's character. I just don't understand how this person would explain something like that.
I think
and that's
a
obviously
lot
an
of
extreme.
it has. Yeah, sure, but I think a lot of it has to do with this idea that like this, and it's another attempt to shame people into capitalist productivity. The idea that any kind of productivity is this unhealthy standard, and that the default for humans should be to do what they want. And this shows that when you're a very wealthy country and relatively globally, most countries are relatively wealthy to where they were. Not every country. There's still a lot of third world countries and stuff, but a lot of the developed world, especially where people have access to Twitter, are relatively wealthy to the point where people can say that without getting laughed out. It's like you tell this to any developing country or any rural area where you have to literally grow crops or you don't eat because you're not going to survive, or you have to go hunting or go gathering. And it's like, no, it's not a matter of, capitalist productivity. It's a matter of literally surviving. And so you can be tired, you can be exhausted from a day of that, but at a point where someone wants to go out and they have to survive and they come back with a handful of berries just because they felt like it, that is laziness. And obviously it's anecdotal, but I mean, I think everyone's had, either experienced themselves or experienced other people where it's like you get out of school and you're like, oh man, it's summer break, I'm so excited. And then day 2, it's like, I'm bored. You're like, okay, like that's a form of laziness. Like, whether, it's not a crime to feel that way, but it is a form of laziness, because you're not just going up doing chores, just cleaning the house, doing things. You're tired. You don't want to make effort. You would rather be entertained and lay down than do work. I mean, that's a form of laziness, and there's degrees of it. So, calling someone a lazy or a sloth can mean anything to them being sort of like negligently so, or you can be like, I'm having a lazy Sunday, and that's fine. But it's a very normal trait in humans, and it's not necessarily our most admirable.
You're kind of reminds me of this conversation I had this week with one of my buddies, and he was like, well, like in a free market society, like, and we'll have to do this type of cringe at some other point, but he's like, we had children working in factories, and like in a free market society, what's to stop children from working in factories? And I was like, dude, like, think about like the Industrial Revolution and realize that all of history, basically, if there was a family of 4, like you had whoever was in the family had to produce enough value, food, resources to feed, clothe, and house 4 people, right? And until we had like actual revolutionized like our different tools and the ways we could actually, like, one person could do that, it actually required all 4 people to do something, right? Like everyone had to work, and that's why children worked in factories. That's why, basically for all of human history, children had to work on farms and stuff, right? Because you had to produce enough food and resources for everyone to be, fed, clothed, and housed. And like you were saying, I appreciated was that this type of thinking, this Marxist thinking, is a product of a society that is overabundance, where people don't understand that the default way that we live is in poverty. And the question should be, why is there not more poverty, right? Because that's the default. Resources have not been extracted. Value has not been extracted. It's not in usable form. And the reason we have so much abundance right now is because we have so much technological advancement that has made us able to, one person to literally do the work of 20 people. And that's why you can have families, that have 1 or 2 people working, and they're able to feed, clothe, and house, all the family members. And that's a miracle, and the way you get there is by not being lazy, right? It's by applying yourself to it. We stand on the shoulders of people who are not lazy. And that's what's so terrifying about this kind of thinking is like, man, you think about it's a very like old person thing to say, but like, where will we be in 50 years, right? With this kind of thinking, and where laziness, because, this side of the aisle kind of views like being disabled or chronically ill or mentally ill or whatever as like a virtue. And so if they're going to put laziness in one of those buckets, it's like they literally view laziness as a virtue in a lot of ways. And I wonder what we'll be like, in 50 years when the people that are our age are now running the world in some, maybe they won't be because, they're too lazy, but it's a virtue to be lazy. But when that's like a virtue and almost like smiled upon, I just don't know where we'll be. That'll be kind of crazy.
And I do want to say that there is a balance to this too, where I don't believe that there's not a point of being overworked or exhausted. I think that it's important for you to balance your productivity with respite and all of that. And I mean, you can make it from sort of what I would say is the moral argument, where I think that there is a responsible amount of providing for yourself, for your family, for surrounding loved ones, but there's also a duty to not just your vocational work, but also your duty to from my perspective, God, and but also taking care of your family, your neighbors, those kinds of things, spending time, being able to re-energize. But even if you're sort of just on a cynical all is productivity level, there's taking care of yourself is ultimately going to help you be more productive too, and not to the point of overworking. So it's like, sometimes I'll hear stories of people at big businesses like Amazon or Google or Microsoft or whatever, those big companies, they're working like 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. at night, no breaks. And I'm like, I get that there are days you have to do that, but doing that as an eternal lifestyle to a corporate thing where you're not building something yourself to own, but it's just sort of at the behest of these people. And there's a point where that can be too much. And I think you should be in a strong negotiating bargaining point. And to the point where, that's the case, I would say taking a break in that context isn't lazy. And then there's working from home when you have a very normal sort of laid back job and you're like, I'm just going to go blow off for 3 hours and like game on my Xbox because I'm working from home. That's being lazy. It is. And you know what? I'm sure a lot of people do it and it's been done, and like there's some productivity to be gained from being able to take breaks. But at a certain point, that does nudge into the realm of laziness. Like if you're spending more of your workday online, like browsing ESPN.org or .com, than you are actually producing revenue, that's a product of laziness. That's not a product of being overworked. So there's a balance to all of this. And I think that sometimes people on the right are not willing to acquiesce that there is such a thing as being overworked. And I think that it's sort of this reactionary chain where, well, you can't be overworked. And they're like, well, there's no such thing as laziness. And there's this tug of war where no one wants to be like, okay, it's all right. There's a middle ground here sometimes. And I hate being a centrist. Ugh, what a gross term. But really, that's where I see myself in this.
Well, it's just all about what gets results, right? And what matters to you in life. And like, I heard a guy talk about, like with, he was saying that for most normal jobs, if you can't get the work required of you done within 40 hours, like a standard work week, based on everything that we've kind of, how society is and how technologically advanced we are, then you probably are doing something wrong, right? Or you're wasting time, or you're not spending your time right, or you're not good enough at your job to be able to do it. And like I think about that because, I work for like a startup. And I was like, and I routinely work way more than 40 hours a week. And I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, like with a technology startup, like you're constantly doing things wrong because you're doing something new, right? And so you kind of have to push at that and always move that forward. And that's kind of like the balance, right? It's like realizing like what is the result that I'm trying to get to, right? Like, and what matters in this? We're trying to revolutionize how buildings are run. I think that's really important. And so I'm going to like work as hard as I can towards it. But then the second it starts encroaching on like things that are higher tier than that, right? Like my family and my wife and, being able to take care of the people immediately around me, then it's like, yeah, I'm going to absolutely say goodbye to that. And I think that it's a lot of what we see with like overwork, like is a reactionary, for tons of reasons, tons of different cultural reasons. But like we did have a period of time in America where people were very, very overworked and like, very much viewed like, hey, like, how much money I bring in and all this stuff is like the end all be all. And that's not healthy, right? Like that should never be the end all be all. But there's nothing wrong with also saying like, oh yeah, like in this moment, like I'm going to work as hard as I can on one thing to try to do it. And the second it infringes and makes it impossible for me to take care of the things that actually matter, then I'm going to quit. But yeah, it's just like you're saying, like I'm a centrist in this area, right? Like I'm about the result of it. As gross as it is to say you're a centrist, but I think this is actually one of the places where it's good. It's like I care. There are things that are important in life, and like developing who you are as a person is very important. And laziness isn't a virtue, and it shouldn't be a virtue because regardless of like what ethical like standpoint you come from, it's both from a Judeo-Christian standpoint, it's not acceptable. If you're an atheist and you just believe in evolution and survival and all that, it's not very acceptable because if you're lazy, you're not going to eat, right? The Bible and atheism in that regard pretty much line up because they both literally say if you don't work, you don't eat, right? Yeah. And it's just a total this type of person like just has total. They need to see like something get built, or they need to like go to a farm or somewhere and see just how much work it takes to just provide the little things that we enjoy every day. And once they see that, maybe they'll be like, oh yeah, there is such a thing as lazy, as well as the opposite of virtue and hard work.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing is like being able to say that there's that balance, but then where you draw that line, I think is that the line has been drawn so far down because of our cultural view of wealth and money and success. And it's so despised in the, it's like, oh man, who's the villain of this, sitcom, or not sitcom, that doesn't make, who's the villain of this, TV show? Oh, it's the big wealthy, billionaire, with the monocle, or, oh, if you make a lot of money, you must have stolen that from someone else. And that's where our cultural touchstone is on success and wealth. And so people who work hard are just demonized in general. And so people's threshold for what they think that balance of that work-life balance should be is so much lower. It's like, what do you mean you're putting in more than 40 hours of work into your week because you're on a startup? Like that's infringing on your right to be at home watching TV. And it's like, no. At the point where you start to feel like burned out by it, then, maybe you need to adjust your hours, or at the time it's infringing on your relationship with your wife or your other family, then you need to cut back. But I think the bar is set very, very low for these people because success and wealth and creating value is not viewed positively in that way. And the other aspect, of course, is that like lazy as a concept and a term isn't just in your vocation and earning money. Even when you think about it in the sense of like with relationships with other people, you don't want to be lazy. Like if you're going to be a good husband, you shouldn't be lazy in your relationship with your wife. You should always be working at that. You should always be working to improve it, and you're going to make mistakes. You're going to be tired, but you don't want to be lazy in your relationship. You want to be self-sacrificing and thinking of her, and thinking of ways that you can make her happy, and vice versa. She should be doing the same for you, or your relationship with your friends or your community. None of those things should be lazy. And so again, it's not just this, the only context in which laziness is a thing is your vocation, making money. And so the more I think about it, the more this tweet makes absolutely no sense, because lazy is a thing. And I think this tweet would be much better put if you scrubbed it from its, Marxist ridiculousness at the end, and you said, oftentimes lazy is used when really people are just chronically ill, disabled, mentally ill, overworked, and exhausted. But laziness still is a thing. Just sometimes that's the excuse, that's the slur, if you want to use that phrase, that people use over those other things, which is, and again, and then sometimes people will use those things as a shield to hide from laziness. So it's all about a balancing act, really. And that's not to say that again, like if someone is mentally ill, then absolutely you shouldn't expect the same sort of standard of, productivity in that same way that you would from someone who's not. But it's also like sometimes people will reach very far out there conclusions on, it's my mental health that's making it's not that I'm lazy, it's that I just can't, I'm physically or mentally unable to handle this today or whatever. And in an over medicated and overdiagnosed world, I think oftentimes it's excuses to run away from problems rather than dealing with the reality that sometimes life is hard, and being productive is hard, and creating things and building things up is just effort is involved, and sometimes it's uncomfortable.
That's good. Yeah, I don't have any more on this one. Maybe I'm being lazy.
I was gonna say, man, that's I don't know. I think you owe me a little bit more here.
Awesome. Well, friends, thanks for hanging out with us today. If you enjoyed our show, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if we said anything cringy, or if you want to just talk with us about anything that we talked about, you can message us online at CringePostPod. That's our handle on all of our social media, or at cringepost.com. And yeah, we'd love to hear from you. I'd love to talk with you. And again, please like, share, and subscribe. Anyways, we'll catch you next time. Thanks.
Peace out.